More than 50 million people across the country take care of a loved one while working full time. It can be a difficult and stressful time for the caregiver.
Yeah, joining us this morning is Chanel Rowe Esquire to discuss her new book and how you can balance your work life and caregiving duties. Good morning, Chanel. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So your new book, Finding Balance, a devotional to help caregivers move from suffering to strength. What a title there. Just talk about what inspired the book.
Absolutely. I have been on this caregiving journey for over 6 years now, and it started at the rise of my career as an attorney, which I've worked in very high pressure roles, defending Fortune 50 companies and federal litigation, and beyond. Ironically, my mother herself was a caregiver, but professionally, and she fell ill with one of the rarest conditions in the world, which adds an additional layer of uncertainty, anxiety, and stress to what is already a very treacherous at times journey for caregiving, and which is completely invisible labor. As you may know, many people don't talk about it. And so I found myself wanting to give inspiration and encouragement that I didn't have. And that's truly what inspired me to tell my story and help to provide some tools, both mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, to what is a growing population of people with need.
Absolutely an inspiring story to tell indeed. Share more about the percentage of caregivers all across the country.
Sure. So currently, 1 in 5 workers in the workplace are caregivers, and that percentage is growing. In the last decade, we've seen a 45% increase in the number of caregivers from 53 million to this year, 63 million. And then also an interesting statistic is that caregivers are getting younger and younger. Particularly those of us in the sandwich generation who are now taking care of parents and children. And out of that population, about 70% work full time. About 70% of those working full time have struggled to maintain their career and their caregiving duties. Up to 70% suffer from clinical levels of depression and anxiety. One of the most alarming statistics I've seen as a millennial is when caregiving starts earlier. You're often up to a 90% deficit in your retirement savings. It could take you up to 21 years of working to regain that income. So the financial strains are real, the emotional strains are real. And unfortunately, this has been a quiet generation because up to over 60% never tell their employers. And so they're showing up to work, they're absent-minded, their productivity is lower, attrition is higher, often getting pushed out of the workplace or having to take refuse promotions for fear of being unable to balance the roles. And it's affecting our workplaces as well as it is affecting a very large population.
And when being a caregiver, when you're talking about those financial stresses and just what you need to know as far as making sure that everything is in line, within your book, just talk about some of the tips that you give readers on what they should do when they find themselves in a caregiver situation.
Sure, and so it's in the shape of a devotional, but it's quite different. I start off by telling my story on how this unfolded and when and where, which is a quite interesting story. And then it's a 60-day devotional with a range of topics that caregivers face. Everything, from anxiety to depression to grief, to tools for emotional regulation and self-talk. And even when it comes to money, all based on biblical principles about how it's important to be a good steward, but also gives a pathway for caregivers to think about creatively about how to make income, right? And how to lean into their gifts and in a way that maybe it might be through entrepreneurship or it might be some other flexible arrangement, because flexibility is truly paramount for this population to be able to continue to show up in the workplace. And they're some of the most loyal and I would say leader ready because of their circumstances, but also to continue to show up for their loved one and most critically to show up for themselves.
Okay, we are having some technical difficulties, so we do want to apologize for that. But Chanel, kind of wrap us up here. Talk about some of the rights caregivers have.
Sure. And so, unfortunately, in the United States, it's a bit of a patchwork of rights that are spread across federal law, your local state law, and your employer, to be quite frank. And so there isn't sort of this caregiver bill of rights per se, but things like FMLA may provide leave, but not paid leave, which can also be add to the financial burden. Some corporations have policies where you can get additional days off or backup care, but they're often very limited. Often caregivers are using vacation days to take loved ones to the doctor. Some local laws also provide anti-discrimination again for caregivers in the workplace. ADA sometimes has there are some ADA provisions that would protect caregivers as persons associated with someone with a disability. But I will say, compared to the international framework across UK, Asia, Canada, we're a bit behind. Those other countries have real robust laws to protect caregivers, especially young caregivers. They include things like paid leave, flexible work arrangements, limits on overtime. There are a number of policy changes that we can make to ensure that this growing population in our world and in our workplace is supported and seen and continues to be productive, which adds to the country's economic growth. I believe the visible labor of caregivers has been estimated somewhere between $600 billion and $1 trillion, depending on what statistics you're looking at. So it's an important group. And my prayer is that policymakers are listening to these needs and paying attention and looking outwards to see how we can better support this population.
Absolutely. Chanel, thank you so much for your time this morning. Some great tips for our viewers. Chanel's new book, Finding Balance, a devotional to help caregivers move from suffering to strength, is available now. Of course, we'll have all the information on that book on our website with this full interview at WISTV.com.